How much money should you have saved for retirement? You know, it's an incredibly important decision. And fortunately, we have some great milestones that we can all use to see if we're on track, right? How much you should have saved for retirement if you're 30, obviously, is very different than how much money you should have saved if you're 50. And in today's video, I'm going to talk about that, right? How much money you should have saved by age in order to retire by normal retirement age in the United States, 65, 67 years old. And I'm going to use data from some large U.S. institutions that are big money managers for people throughout the United States. Companies like Fidelity Investments and T. Rowe Price and Citizen Bank. And you can look at these and say, you know what? Some years you're going to be ahead of these milestones. Some years you're going to be behind in these milestones. But generally, are you on track and how are you doing? And before we get into the numbers, I just want to share that, you know, there's all these benchmarks out there. You know, you should have the 4% rule probably being the most famous, which would basically say you need to have 25 times the amount of money that you plan on spending in retirement, right? The inverse of 4% is 25. So if you wanted to spend $50,000 a year, you'd multiply that by 25 and that would be $1.25 million. But, you know, it's more complex than that, right? Because we're hopefully all going to have other sources of income, the most important of which is Social Security. For Americans, but some people are going to have rental income coming in. Some people might have a pension from an employer, and your spending's not going to be constant. The person that says, I want to spend $50,000 a year, well, is it going to be $50,000 a year for your entire retirement? You know, the reality is none of us know how expensive end of life is going to be for us, right? I mean, it can get very expensive if we're unfortunate and end up in the hospital with a chronic disease, and we're there for a long time with very expensive medical care. So that's an unknown that we all face. And then what does the go-go years, the first, you know, decade of retirement, what does that look like for you? And some people, the go-go years means spending quality time with the grandkids, and that's a wonderful, wonderful way to spend that time. But for other people, the go-go years means doing expensive trips throughout the world that they've never been able to do. And so those are very different things. So yes, there's these benchmarks, and yes, these institutions are going to say, you know, this is what multiple of your salary you should have. But use them as benchmarks because they're not cast in stone. It depends on your situation. And then also remember that, you know, the reality is very few Americans actually have the benchmark amount. I mean, I'll give you a spoiler alert. You know, at 67, one of the major institutions, actually, I think two of them say you should have 10 times your annual salary. Well, you know, if you and your spouse are making $100,000 a year between the two of you, you're both making $50,000 if you're married, if you have a spouse. You know, 10 times that is $1 million. And I can share with you that fewer than 10% of all retirees in the United States, 65 and older, when I say retirees, retire with $1 million or more, right? Very few people have that. And so I've done a number of videos where I share different comparisons and how people are doing. So, you know, these reports I think are aspirational, these numbers. They're hard to get to. You know, I share that if you're not saving much now, the first goal is to get to 10%. You know, put together a budget. I'm not a big fan of budgets. I don't like budgets personally. But if you're not saving anything now, I think a budget is a good place to start. And do what you can to start saving 10%. Really separate your budget into needs versus wants, right? I should say necessities. Rent, food, utility, transportation to and from work. I mean, those are the needs. And then the wants are, you know, other things that you spend on. And cut back to the needs. I think just like, I'm not a fan of diets either, but just like when people diet, they tend to be really strict in the first couple of weeks, just kind of reset their eating mode. It's the same thing with budgeting. If you can cut back to those needs and as little extra above that for 30, 60, or 90 days, that can kind of reset your budgeting so that you can start saving 10%. And once you're saving 10%, you know, I wish that 10% was enough, but the reality is most of us should probably be saving 15 to 25%, as you're about to see for these numbers. Okay, so the sources for this is a June 1st, 2023 report by T. Rowe Price, an August 2021 report by Fidelity, and a recent report by Citizens Bank. And these are multiples of your salary. So, and all of these reports, the early years, the 30 through 45 are all the same. The 30-year-old, the institutions would say you should have 1 time salary. By the time you're 35, you should have 2 times your salary. By the time you're 40, you should have 3 times your salary. And by the time you're 45, you should have 4 times your salary. So if you're making $75,000 a year, that would say a 45-year-old should have $300,000 saved. Now, not all accounts are the same, right? Somebody that has $300,000 in a Roth IRA has much more spending power than somebody that has $300,000 in a regular IRA. And the reason is, when you take money out of that regular IRA, you're going to have to pay ordinary income tax on that. Now, you might be able to pull it out in a strategy where even though you're paying ordinary income tax, you can keep that tax rate low, okay? But again, these are benchmarks. They depend on a lot of different factors. And I just point that out, you know, a Roth 401k versus a regular 401k, 300,000 in each is not equal. Okay, let's keep going. At 50, T. Rowe Price would say you should have 3 to 6 times your salary saved, and Fidelity would say you should have 6 times your salary saved. Now, I'm going to get into Citizens Bank at the end, at retirement age. So at 55, T. Rowe Price would say you should have 4.5 to 8 times your salary saved, and Fidelity would say you should have 7 times your salary saved. Let's keep going. At 60, T. Rowe Price, now this is a huge, I mean, this is a 50% difference. T. Rowe Price would say that you should have 5.5 to 11 times your salary saved. And Fidelity would say you should have 8 times. So again, let's take this married couple with $100,000. You know, Fidelity would say you should have $800,000 saved. That's a lot of money, and I can tell you very, very few Americans have that much saved. So if you don't have that much saved by the time you're 60, don't beat up on yourself, right? These are just benchmarks. And again, it depends on how the money's saved, right? If this is $800,000 in the bank, you've already paid tax on that money if it's just in a regular account. And I'm just using simple numbers. Simple accounts. So this is a tax me as I go account, just a regular taxable account at the bank. If you have $800,000 there, you can take out $50,000 a year, and you've already paid tax on that. So just withdrawing money from the bank is not a taxable event from a regular savings account. If it's from a Roth IRA, again, that's going to be tax-free money. Now stick with me, because I'm going to give you the 65 and 67 numbers as well. But again, there's these 3 buckets, right? There's the regular IRA and the regular 401k, which I call don't tax me now, but tax me later, right? You put money into a regular IRA and a regular 401k in pre-tax dollars, but you're going to get taxed later. Then there's the tax me as I go account, which is the money at like a regular bank account, a regular savings account, where you pay money on the interest that you make on that money every year, but you put the money in after tax dollars. And when you go to the bank and you take out, $200 for the weekend, that's not taxable income for you. Just taking money out of your checking account or your savings account. I should mention none of this is tax advice. I'm not an accountant. This is not specific advice for you. These are things for you to think about. And I suggest that you work with a fee-only financial advisor. You can find one just by Googling one. Okay, so we talked about the tax me as I go account, which is the bank account. We talked about the tax me later account, which is the regular IRAs and the regular 401ks. And then there's a tax me now, but don't tax me later account. And that would be a Roth IRA account, right? You put money in after-tax dollars, but then, assuming that you meet all the criteria, you take it out in tax-free dollars. So, again, for a 60-year-old T. Rowe Price would say 5.5 to 11 times your salary. So, husband and wife making $100,000 a year, somewhere between $550,000. And 1.1 million, and Fidelity would just give you straight 8 times is what they would say, 800,000 for that couple. And then at retirement, 65 to 67, depending on the report. T. Rowe Price would say 7 times, 7 to 13.5 times. And Fidelity would say 10 times, and Citizen Bank would say 10 to 12 times. Those are big numbers. Again, fewer than 10% of people retiring at age 65 have $1 million or more when they retire. If you want to know more about average retirement income for Americans, watch that video. And if you want to learn more about why I think you should think about retiring as soon as you can, watch this video down here.